The light of dawn slips through the olive groves, splintering shadows across the rough-hewn armor of men who have not yet learned to call themselves soldiers in the way we know the word now. They are farmers, stonemasons, potters, ordinary men, called upon to shoulder a shield so heavy it might bend their spines before they even see the enemy's spear. Yet they stand here on the edge of history and myth, ready to become what we will later call hoplites, the iron core of the phalanx, the flesh and bronze that turned Greece from scattered city-states into a crucible of warcraft. They polish their helmets until they catch the sun like a god's eye. The Corinthian bronze masks their mortal faces, transforms them into something more than a man, but less than a monster. It is said the first hoplites marched with shields so wide they could cover half a man's body, and half of the next brotherhood forged in the weight of wood and hide and bronze. To stand in the phalanx was to surrender part of oneself to the mass, the many becoming one terrible engine of spears and shields. But what we know is only half the story, for beneath the shining armor of history lie the questions that historians rarely ask. What did they whisper to one another on the eve of battle? Whose name did they carve secretly inside their shields, hoping the gods might read it and spare them? And what forgotten tricks of strategy, what fleeting innovations might have turned the tide of forgotten wars in the fields of Marathon and the mountain pass of Thermopylae? The hoplites faced the Persians' armies vast as the sea, clothed in silk and scale armor, wielding archery and cavalry as extensions of an empire's endless reach. The Greeks answered not with numbers, but with discipline, unity, and a formation so simple yet so devastating that even centuries later, generals speak of its genius in hushed admiration. Yet for all we know of the phalanx, its bristling wall of overlapping shields, the forest of spears jutting outward, few ask how it truly evolved. There are fragments of evidence, a line here in Herodotus, a phrase there in Xenophon, hinting at experiments that vanished like footprints in wet sand. Some believe the early hoplites toyed with formations that bent and flexed, deceptive movements to lure enemies into a false breach. Others whisper of lightweight armor forged from layered linen and bronze scales that made them as swift as they were strong, an innovation lost when cities fell and knowledge burned. It's almost too convenient to think that the hoplite phalanx sprang fully formed from the mind of a single strategist. In truth, it was likely a slow, patchwork process, tested in skirmishes that left no songs behind. Farmers turned warriors, passing down lessons not in parchment, but in scars, where to hold the shield, to deflect an upward thrust, when to push forward as one, when to feign retreat, to draw the reckless in. These were tactics spoken in the smoky hush of village huts and carried on the wind between warring palaes. Yet the deeper one looks, the stranger the possibilities become. Imagine, for a moment, that buried beneath the ruins of some long-forgotten polis is a scroll detailing a strategy so unorthodox it was forbidden, suppressed by those who feared its implications. A way to break the phalanx from within an invisible wedge, a formation that moved like water, a betrayal of the very unity that made the hoplites strong. Would such a secret not be worth burying, worth burning every mention of it, so that the phalanx would endure as a symbol of Greek invincibility? Modern scholars shrug at these possibilities. They prefer the safety of marble statues and measured lines in dusty texts. But war is not safe, and history is rarely tidy. The hoplite was no marble figure. He was sweat and breath, fear and defiance. He stood ankle-deep in mud, shoulder pressed against the man beside him, praying the shield wall would hold when the enemy's chariots crashed like thunder. Consider also the deeper shadows cast by mercenaries, men who sold their phalanx training to foreign kings, carrying Greek tactics into Persia, Egypt, even India. We know of the 10,000, Xenophon's ragged band of Greek mercenaries who marched through Persian lands after their warlord employer fell. But who trained them, truly? What forgotten veteran, exiled for a crime unspoken, passed on new methods to break cavalry charges or turn mountains into kill zones? And how much of that knowledge never returned home, but lingered in the sands and river valleys, absorbed by foreign armies whose own records have long since crumbled? Each hoplite carried into battle not just a spear and shield, but a quiet philosophy. The helmet's narrow eye slits forced him to look only forward, to trust the man to his left to guard his heart, the man to his right to keep the line unbroken. In the phalanx, the self was meaningless except as part of the whole, a paradox in a culture obsessed with personal glory. Here, there were no heroes who fought alone like Achilles, only nameless ranks moving as one, the individual ambition, sublimated into a collective will to survive. Yet even this unity was fragile. One weak link, one moment of fear, could tear a hole wide enough for slaughter to pour through. And so, in secret, some hoplites turned to rituals and charms small, offerings to unknown gods, protective runes etched on the inside of greaves. Archaeologists sometimes find these markings and dismiss them as superstition, but they hint at an undercurrent of personal dread that no formation could fully contain. Behind the battlefield lay the quiet genius of strategy. Generals like Midiatus at Marathon and Leonidas at Thermopylae understood terrain. Like poets understand silence, using land as a weapon, bottlenecking overwhelming numbers into narrow killing grounds. But imagine what secrets have been lost of generals whose names we never learned, who outwitted enemies so completely that no record remains to tell how. What subtle finds and sudden maneuvers were invented, only to vanish when a city was razed or a scroll was lost to the flames. Sometimes the evidence surfaces in odd places, a fragment of pottery, an unfinished line in a play, a strange formation described by an enemy chronicler. They suggest that the hoplite way of war was not static, but alive, malleable, opportunistic, a hidden school of thought that might have flourished had Greece not torn itself apart. In endless civil wars, the Peloponnesian War, with its brutal sieges and plague, shattered the old certainties. The phalanx held, but began to bend. Light infantry and cavalry rose in importance. Mercenary generals swapped loyalty for coin, and the disciplined shield wall of the hoplites became just another tool in a growing, shifting arsenal. And yet, the idea of the hoplite endures because it taps something elemental. The vision of men standing shoulder to shoulder, shields locked, spears forward, facing death not as scattered souls but as a living wall. Even today, soldiers study these ancient formations, seeking lessons in unity and resolve. But do they also sense the shadows, those hints of stranger tactics, forbidden strategies, and lost innovations that could have changed not just battles, but the shape of empires? In the quiet before the clash, when the earth trembles under the stomp of marching feet, when the hoplites kneel to tie sandal straps or murmur final prayers to ours, one wonders if they too felt they were guardians of something larger than themselves, something too dangerous to record, too powerful to trust to parchment and ink alone. Perhaps that is why, even now, we search their ruins for secrets, why we sift ashes for half-burned scrolls and carve theories from the scars of ancient armor. Because, deep down, we suspect the greatest truths of war lie not in what is written, but in what was made to disappear. Night falls over the makeshift encampment of the hoplites, a drifting hush broken only by the clatter of bronze, the low murmur of men too tired to sleep and too restless to dream. In the flickering glow of oil lamps, they mend straps, sharpen spearheads, whisper half-forgotten prayers to household gods and distant ancestors. This is the secret life of the phalanx, what the marble statues never show us. The mortal cracks that run beneath the iron discipline. A few paces away, the Strategos commander of men and fate paces alone. His cloak drapes like a shadow behind him, eyes scanning the black hills for signs of movement, for the flicker of an enemy torch. He carries not just the weight of tomorrow's clash, but the weight of knowledge, fragments of stratagems whispered from older wars, stories of desperate ruses and lost tactics no scroll dares name. In these stolen moments before dawn, when certainty is a lie and courage a thin thread, the line between soldier and philosopher begins to blur. If we peer into these shadows, we find more than tactics and bronze. We find the unsettling possibility that our neat understanding of Greek warfare is a myth crafted by victors and scribes who preferred the clarity of simple lines to the chaos of truth. What if, alongside the phalanx, there existed bands of irregulars, Greek shadow companies, trained to strike from darkness, to sabotage supplies, to poison wells and spirit away commanders under cover of night? It is convenient to dismiss this as modern fancy, Yet scattered accounts suggest that in the tangled ravines and dense forests of Greece, war was not always rows of spears clashing under the midday sun. Some passages in Thucydides hint at covert raids and sudden betrayals, quick murders in the moonlight that never made it into grand speeches on the Knicks. There are tales half rumor, half accusation of hoplite deserters turned mercenaries, who sold their knowledge of formations to the highest bidder, sometimes returning to face their countrymen in battle wearing the same style of armor. Now pointed the other way, it is here that the boundaries blur. The hoplites' code, so bound by honor and the polis, gave way under the weight of desperation and coin. During the long misery of the Peloponnesian War, entire battalions vanished into the service of foreign kings. A soldier's loyalty could be bought with gold, wine, promises of farmland far from the ruin of his home city, and with them traveled Greek secrets: how to hold a line, how to pivot a phalanx on broken ground, how to break cavalry with a sudden spear thrust angled for a horse's belly. What was lost in this migration of warriors is almost impossible to chart. Did these exiles teach enemy armies forgotten arts? Did they carry innovations that might have made Greece unassailable had they remained? Imagine the library that could have existed: scrolls penned by grizzled strategoi, recording how to mold hoplites into silent hunters, how to adapt the phalanx to swamp or mountain, how to build portable siege engines light enough to drag behind an infantry column. But cities burn, traitors vanish, secrets fade into the night. The terrain itself was as much a conspirator in these lost arts as the warriors, who vanished into exile. Greece is no vast plain like Mesopotamia, nor an endless desert like Egypt. Its jagged mountains and labyrinthine valleys made perfect breeding grounds for ambush and deception. A disciplined phalanx was a terror on open ground, but a death trap on a narrow pass if caught by guerrillas who knew every goat path. It is easy to imagine how clever commanders, too poor to match an enemy's numbers, would have turned geography into a hidden blade. The battle at Thermopylae is taught as a legend of standfast heroism. 300 Spartans and their allies holding the pass against a sea of Persians. But deeper study suggests that the Greeks knew the terrain so well that they transformed what should have been a slaughter into a choke point of cunning and cruelty. For days, Persian numbers meant nothing. Hoplites struck from narrow gaps, vanished behind rock walls, emerged again where the enemy least expected. It was not just strength but the tactical use of secrecy that made the pass a nightmare for Xerxes' endless ranks. Yet even in this most famous of Greek stands, there are hints of something unspeakable, stories of scouts who disappeared behind enemy lines, feeding false information to the Persian campfires. Rumors of betrayal so tangled that even Herodotus seems reluctant to untangle it fully. The final defeat at Thermopylae came not just from sheer numbers, but from a path shown to the Persians by a Greek traitor, a betrayal that suggests there were those among the hoplites who knew more about covert movement than any official record would admit. When the sun rises at last, the hoplites form up, shields gleam, spear tips quiver like teeth bared. From a distance, they appear unbreakable, an iron wave rolling toward whatever enemy stands in its path. But within each man's mind churn questions darker than any dawn. Who will stand fast when the wall buckles? Who will falter, leaving a crack wide enough for slaughter to pour through? And what might they do in that instant of collapse? What forbidden tactic, what desperate ruse might spring from a mind pressed to the brink of death? Among these hoplites walk the seeds of future revolutions in warfare. From the phalanx comes Alexander's Macedonian variant, the Sarissa-wielding mass that will roll over Asia like thunder. But buried within the hoplites' discipline lie the first inklings of special forces, small detachments detached from the line to scout, sabotage, assassinate. Later centuries will perfect these shadows into Roman speculators, medieval spies, modern reconnaissance units. But here, among the dusty boots and scratched shields, the seed is already there and spoken. Dangerous, waiting for the right crisis to bloom. And what of the gear they carried? The subtle refinements that might have vanished with them. Some historians believe that hoplites experimented with composite shields, layering bronze with rare woods, hidden linen cords to absorb shock and make the aspis lighter yet stronger. Imagine a line of soldiers who could move twice as fast, yet still resist a cavalry charge? What if early engineers in Thebes or Corinth devised prototypes for portable defenses, shield segments that locked together to form instant barricades? On rough terrain, such ideas linger on the edges of pottery sketches and offhand lines in ruined inscriptions, tantalizing ghosts of what might have been. Every so often, an archaeologist uncovers something that doesn't quite fit in oddly. Riveted greave, a fragment of helmet that hints at detachable visors or adjustable cheek guards. Such finds are often dismissed as outliers, experimental failures. But what if they were parts of a larger, more radical shift in battlefield design? A lost arms race fought not only with bronze and iron, but with cunning arms race that might have pushed Greek warfare decades ahead had civil war and invasion not smashed these fragile ideas to pieces. In these possibilities lies the enduring riddle of the hoplite. They stand in our imagination as fixed figures: bronze helm, round shield, long spear. Yet beneath that image is an undercurrent of flux-shifting tactics, secret schools of thought, dangerous innovations that flickered into being only to be stamped out by the jealous guardians of tradition or the ravages of endless wars. The phalanx remains their most visible legacy, but the invisible legacies, the shadow formations, the whispered betrayals, the hidden experiments echo far beyond the blood-soaked plains of Marathon or the narrow pass at Thermopylae. They live on in the principle that no army, no strategy, no weapon is ever truly complete. There are always new edges waiting to be honed, old truths waiting to be broken. And so the hoplite stands ready again, beneath the olive trees and the restless stars, waiting for the horn blast that will send him forward. In that final heartbeat before the charge, in the hush before bronze smashes against bronze, he carries with him the weight of secrets too heavy for any single generation to bear. This is the heart of war, its visible clash and its hidden shadow, its noble myth and its dangerous reality. And though the battle will come at dawn, the true struggle is fought in the quiet spaces between shield and mind, in the secrets buried beneath the olive groves, waiting for some future seeker to uncover what was lost. Dawn cracks open not with a shout, but with the hush of breath held between heartbeats. On the rising slopes above a field yet unnamed, the hoplites brace for the collision that will bind their names to the soil forever. Bronze catches the first light, shields overlap, spears rattle against armor in a rhythm older than any king's decree. In that sound like rain on iron you hear not only courage, but the deep, hidden machinery of war moving just beneath the skin of history. To modern eyes, this moment feels fixed, an endless loop of men pressing forward behind shields, their lives measured in paces and thrusts. But here, at the ragged edge of what we know, the truth begins to slip through our fingers. Beneath the shield wall lies something we rarely speak of: the labyrinth of thought, the silent debates of strategists who dreamed not just of holding lines, but of breaking them in ways no enemy could predict. Consider the riddle of the wedge formation, a shape at odds with the neat geometry of the phalanx. Some claim it was born on these very plains, when desperate generals faced enemies too vast to meet head-on. Imagine a phalanx that fractures itself willingly, driving spear points into the enemy like a knife into flesh. Accounts from scattered texts suggest this tactic appeared in battles against Macedonian horsemen, hints that Greek commanders were not merely defenders of tradition, but restless minds, willing to bend the old ways when the moment demanded. But who taught them to bend? Where did the knowledge come from? And where did it go when the victors rewrote the scrolls? Some historians argue that military guilds existed, informal brotherhoods of veteran hoplites, who met in secret, trading tactics and experimental ideas far from the watchful eyes of city elders. These men, unbound by dogma, tested new gear, drilled new maneuvers, whispered heretical thoughts about flexibility, maneuver warfare, even psychological finds meant to break an enemy's spirit before the spears ever clashed. Such brotherhoods would have been dangerous to the polis, which depended on conformity as much as courage. A soldier who thought to freely was as much a threat to his own side as to the enemy. Better to enshrine the phalanx as unchanging perfection than admit that behind the bronze masks lay minds hungry to reinvent the killing fields. And then there are the rumors, persistent, Unsettling of hoplites, who never returned from certain wars because they did not die, but vanished into distant lands. Mercenaries who found new patrons in the courts of Persia, India, or the scattered tribes beyond Thrace. Some never again lifted a spear. Others taught what they knew, planting seeds that might blossom centuries later in unfamiliar armor, foreign drill formations, cavalry tactics that bore the ghostly echo of Greek discipline. It is a long-standing puzzle why certain battle innovations appear to leap whole, from one culture to another, seemingly without connection. A strange wedge here, a sudden pike phalanx there. Perhaps not all knowledge crossed by conquest. Perhaps some of it traveled in the minds of soldiers who sold their silence for gold, and freedom in lands where no historian would think to look. What we do know is that the phalanx did not die when Greek city-states fell to Macedon's rise. Instead, it transformed. Under Philip II and his son Alexander, the spear grew longer, the shield smaller, the formation deeper, but the essence remained, men locked together not just by armor and drill, but by an unspoken contract that their lives were worth little alone and everything together. Alexander's campaigns stretched that contract to its limit. Greek warfare once, a parochial affair of city versus city, now surged across deserts, rivers, mountains. Hoplites marched alongside cavalry that swept like lightning across the plains of Gaugamela, faced elephants in India, stormed walled cities with siege engines, whose design whispered of older, hidden trials back in forgotten Greek workshops. Some scholars suspect that the engineers who built these machines were descendants, literal or philosophical, of the same minds who experimented with shield barricades and portable stockades. A lineage of thinkers whose fragile innovations flickered to life when ambition, terrain, and desperation aligned just so. But the story of the hoplite is not just a chain of tactics and iron. It is a mirror for the darker riddle of war itself. The human mind's endless hunger to push the known into the unknown, to bend death into new shapes. Beneath every shield wall lies the ghost of some unsanctioned idea, some rebel mind wondering what might happen if the formation broke rank. Not from fear, but by design. When the phalanx finally fell to Rome's legions, some say it was doomed by its rigidity. The Roman manipular system, with its flexible lines and layered reserves, made the Greek wall of spears feel like a relic. But even then, the hoplite spirit did not vanish. Its core lesson, discipline bound to trust, the individual subsumed by the mass, bled forward into every army that followed. From legionaries locking shields at the Rhine to medieval pike squares repelling cavalry charges, the ghost of the phalanx marched on, yet its forgotten secrets may linger even deeper. Some suspect that the hidden schools of thought, the brotherhoods of rogue strategists and mercenary minds, did not die but melted into new forms, covert councils, secret academies, whispering their doctrines down the centuries. The Knights Templar, the shadowy military orders of Byzantium, the guilds of siege masters and sappers in the Renaissance, who claimed their methods came from scrolls copied from older, burned libraries. It is easy to scoff. History favors the straight line, cause, effect, battle, victory. But dig through the ash of cities lost to time. Study the buried armor that doesn't fit the pattern. Read between the lines of generals who speak in riddles and you feel it. The ancient hoplite is not a statue in a museum. He is an idea that refuses to die. He stands behind every modern special forces unit that trains to move as one. Every shock troop that hits the enemy with unyielding unity. And perhaps, just perhaps, he carries within him lessons still waiting to be uncovered. Innovations too dangerous, too unstable to have survived the fire and stone of antiquity. What secret tactics might lie in untranslatable tablets, hidden in tombs under the silt of the Aegean? What knowledge might still echo in fragmentary texts in neglected monastery libraries? Each forgotten trick, each buried maneuver, is a reminder that war is not just fought with weapons, but with ideas that vanish, reappear, mutate. When you stand before the marble statues of the hoplite shield at rest, spear tilted skyward, look closer. Imagine the marks etched on the inside of that shield. A name, a prayer, a crude diagram of a formation no historian ever recorded. Somewhere beneath the bronze breastplate lies not just the heart of a farmer turned warrior, but the stubborn spark of innovation burned down to embers. waiting for someone reckless enough to fan it into flame again. And as dawn breaks over this forgotten field, the Hoplites brace for battle not as relics, but as messengers from the past warning us that even the most rigid wall can be broken by a single, unsanctioned thought. So the line holds. The spears dip, the charge begins. And somewhere beyond the clamor, the true secrets of war drift like dust through time, waiting for the next hand to reach into the shadows and find what history tried to bury. Stay curious, like, share, subscribe, and tell us what secrets you'd uncover.